Andor Season 2, Episodes 7, 8, and 9 are here, and
Yes! Yeah!
okay, this is some of the greatest Star Wars we've ever seen, and some fans already calling this 3-episode arc the greatest Star Wars ever created.
That's impossible!
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
Now, I assure you this is just the breakdown for Episode 7, so there will be no spoilers for Episode 8 and 9. All I'll say is peak. And Episode 7 comes first, and from Force healers to very familiar rebel faces to an attempt to assassinate Dedra Meero, this 7th episode has a lot going on, as it has the job of setting up the greatness that comes after it. So without further ado, let's break it down. Episode 7 is titled Messenger, in reference to Cassian Andor, as this Force healer lady gives him some crazy insight onto the future of his life. But we'll get to that in a second, because this episode opens with 1 year later, since Bix got her revenge on Dr. Gorst, and the two left their home on Coruscant. It's also been a year on Gorman, since we saw Cinta die and the rebellion be born, with the help of the Empire watching on, with plans of Krennic, Partagaz, and Dedra all in motion to be able to mine the Calcite on their planet. And 1 year later, it is now 2 BBY. And yet again, BBY stands for the Battle of Yavin, which is the end of A New Hope where the Death Star goes kaboom. But this episode really opens on Yavin 4. Now, I did not expect this at all. I actually didn't even think Yavin would be until next week. But here we are, opening scene of Episode 7 on Yavin 4. This is the home of the original Rebel base from Star Wars A New Hope. And we have seen Cassian here before in Rogue One, but also in Episode 1 through 3. However, that was 2 years ago, and the last time he was here, the rebellion looked a little bit different. If you remember, these two groups of rebels were fighting amongst each other, barely even being able to survive and running out of food. But now we see Yavin 1 year ahead of Rogue One, and with that we are guaranteed some familiar faces. And we see a big one later in this episode. But this shuttle that is flying in to open the episode has Wilmon on it. And last we saw Wilmon was in Episode 5 last week with Saw Gerrera when he started breathing in the Rhydonium after Saw's incredibly motivating speech. Now, I will say these year gaps between these 3 episodes are perfect.
It was perfect. Perfect.
They allow you to see these characters in very different places than where we saw them last. And getting to put those puzzles together as we go along in this 7th episode is pretty damn cool. Because Wilmon has spent a lot of time over this last year on Gorman, and we quickly find that out. As we see a hut in the trees in the forest. Slightly outside the rebel base, Bix and Cassian are living peacefully. This looks like a combination of Yoda's house on Dagobah meets the Ewok huts in the trees on Endor. Cassian is a lot of pain, as in this last year, he got shot by a blaster bolt in the back of his shoulder. And as Bix is trying to treat the wound, Wilmon shows up. Immediately, Cassian wants to know where he's been this entire time. And although Wilmon doesn't want to tell him right away, he eventually gets it out of him. He's been working for Luthen on Gorman. And it's made clear immediately that still, Cassian and Luthen are on bad terms. Wilmon tells Cassian that Luthen needs to know that he can still trust him. Because clearly here on Yavin, with so many people coming in every single day, they don't know if they can trust everybody here. This is a completely different side of the rebellion. Because the galaxy is so large and the Empire is everywhere, different rebel cells are popping up all across the galaxy. So just like we see the Ghost crew in Star Wars Rebels, and these rebels on Yavin 4, and the rebels on Gorman, and Luthen's group of rebels, they are all rebelling against the Empire. They all have the same cause. But right now, as of 2 BBY, they are all very spread across the galaxy, all linked together by very small strings. However, we know by the time of Rogue One, all those strings are pulled together, as the rebellion seems to be a pretty united force. However, Cassian reminds Wilmon there's a difference between winning and fighting. He's saying that what Luthen wants to do is just fighting, but what Yavin 4 has the possibility of doing is winning this war. They need an army.
I have an army. We have a Hulk.
We then cut to Gorman, where we see Syril walking through the courtyard, just as he did in Episode 4. Now, the only difference here is that all the Gormans are gone. This courtyard is completely shut off for the Empire, as the plan that was put in place by Krennic all the way back in Episode 1 of this 2nd season. The Empire is making the Gormans look like the bad guys, so that the rest of the galaxy will side with the Empire when they eventually kill all the Gormans. Now, Dedra is in on this plan, but Syril is not. And we get to see in this episode Syril have his doubts about what side he truly is on. And as he walks through the courtyard, we overhear these newscasters talking about all the horrible events, these Imperial-placed rebel attacks happening on Gorman. And the biggest one was a firebombing last night. Back on Yavin, Wilmon explains the real reason he's there. The real reason he's so invested in Gorman, too. And that is Dedra Meero. Dedra has made quite a few enemies with this group, as back in Season 1, not only was Dedra the reason that Bix got tortured, but also the reason that Wilmon's dad died, was hung up in the streets. So although Cassian might not like Dedra either, Will and Bix have a lot more personal vendettas against this lady. As Cassian storms out, Wilmon says to Bix she's a monster, and this might be the only chance we get to take her out. She's standing in the wide open on Gorman as she's the one in charge. And that's when we cut to Dedra on Gorman, as we see her having a conversation with Partagaz. And slowly, over time, across this episode and the next, we see her start to lose it a little. She is balancing her relationship between her and Syril versus her relationship with the Empire and how she's supposed to be doing this top secret mission on Gorman and keeping those secrets from her boyfriend Syril. Partagaz tells Dedra that the Emperor has taken great interest in what she's doing on Gorman. He even mentions that Krennic and Palpatine are having a meeting right now. But he goes on to say that the original plan is still in motion. All the great Imperial scientists couldn't find a better way, and they still need the Calcite on Gorman. Meaning this 2-year-long plan to get rid of the Gormans has to happen now. And this is when we get introduced to Captain Kaido. Captain Kaido is a crisis specialist. He's the one there to help manage the situation that goes down. Now, although this guy looks badass with the scar on his face, he is still not in charge, as Dedra needs to give the all clear for Captain Kaido to do anything. So Dedra is still in charge. And right before the conversation is over, Dedra reminds Partagaz that the rebels on Gorman have weapons. And all Partagaz says is we're counting on it. They need the Gormans to overreact, to shoot first, much like Han did in the Cantino on Mos Eisley. Because if it looks like the Gormans were the ones who shot first, well then the Empire won't be at fault, right? And as Dedra walks into the hall, she's met by Syril. And Syril is now putting this all together, as the Empire is getting sloppy with these setups for the Gorman rebels. As last night's bombing has rumors flying that it was a setup by the Empire. But it's too late now. The rest of the galaxy thinks the Gormans are the worst because of the Imperial propaganda. But Syril, over the last year, has sort of grown connected to these Gorman rebels and doesn't like that the Empire are the ones bombing themselves in blaming the Gorman rebels. Because unlike Dedra, Syril has some sort of heart, and that is made clear later on in this episode. But Dedra has to assure Syril that everything's going to be okay. And she even tells him that good things are waiting for them back at home on Coruscant. They will be rewarded. Greatest couple ever. We cut back to Coruscant, where we see Mon Mothma arriving at the Senate building. And this is where we are reminded that her driver Clorvis works for the ISB. He's a spy, but Mon Mothma has known that for quite some time. Now, the weirdest part about this episode is the lack of Perrin. Mon Mothma's husband was very relevant in the first 6 episodes of this season. However, in this 7th episode, he is nowhere to be seen. Guess they're not together all the time, but still a little weird. As they walk into the Senate building, Mon Mothma is stopped by Senator Oran. He sits on the Senate representing Gorman, and he informs Mon that they are near the point of no return. Mon brings up the bombing last night, and Oran says they don't even bother anymore. Their lies are so bad that everybody should be able to see it. But he's not really here to ask Mon for help, because there really is no way of helping him. He's there to tell Mon thank you. Even tells her that he's done a bad job of showing his appreciation for what she does. And he finishes the conversation by warning her to protect herself, because although Gorman is going down, she might be next. Back on Gorman, we get reacquainted with our Gorman rebels. Their leader, Carlo Rylance, is trying to settle the rest of them down, as they are quite mad about the Empire and their recent antics. But Rylance is saying they should keep the peace. However, it seems at this point that there is no way to stop the Empire from making the rebels look like the bad guy. And all this arguing is not going to get them anywhere. And we do see a few new faces in this room. One of them being the old bellboy from episode 5 last week. He's the one who helps Cassian to his room when he arrives on Gorman and tells him about the Tarkin massacre that occurred years before. Now, this kid being a rebel is very important for later on in the episode. Back on Yavin, Bix is taking Cassian unknowingly to a Force healer. Yeah, I didn't see this one coming either. Force healing in Star Wars is something that is very new to the canon, as only few characters have the ability to do this. We've seen Rey do it in the sequel trilogy, and even Grogu do it in The Mandalorian. However, at the time of Andor, the time of the Empire, Force users are kinda hard to find, and Force healers, according to Cassian, aren't real. They don't work. He even says if Marva were here, his mom, she wouldn't like this, as she hated Force healers. Now, Cassian's hatred and disbelief for the Force is something that is shared across the galaxy. The Jedi Order and their fall led to a lot of people hating, or at least not believing, in the Force itself, much like Cassian. Now, many questions have already come up online about this character. Even in the credits, she isn't given a name. Her name is just Force Healer. So it's clear that she's not supposed to be some crazy character that we know from the Clone Wars or anything like that. And many fans already have some problems with this random person showing up and being able to force heal, something that a character like Obi-Wan or Anakin or Luke Skywalker wasn't able to accomplish. And while that is true, it's very different. Force abilities that characters have vary per person. This lady right here would not be going toe-to-toe with Anakin Skywalker in a lightsaber duel, and also wouldn't be able to predict the future through dreams of her dying wife who's pregnant. I mean, maybe we only got a couple minutes of her on screen. Maybe she does have a dying wife who's pregnant, and she turns to the dark side and slaughters a bunch of younglings. I don't know. But as the Force has been explained multiple times throughout the course of Star Wars' canon by Ahsoka Tano and Master Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Force flows through everyone. The ability to use it, however, takes training and a little bit of gifted talent. From the conversation that Cassian and Bix share, it seems like this lady, her force healing abilities, don't work all the time, and Cassian is a hater nonetheless. However, this lady stops the person she is trying to work on right now to walk over directly to Cassian. As she touches his shoulder to try and heal it, she senses something different about Cassian. As she explains, she usually senses the weight of things that she can't see. Pain, fear, need. Most people carry their past, but very few, like Cassian, they gather as they go. There's a purpose to what they do, as he is a messenger, and there is some place he needs to be. This is not only explaining the importance of Cassian to the rebellion, but also foreshadowing the fact that he is literally a messenger in Rogue One, as he gets the message of the Death Star plans out to the rebellion and dies in doing so. I mean, this whole scene is pretty damn crazy, and Bix knows that there's a tough decision that Cassian needs to make. Right now, he is not fully committed to the rebellion and to the cause. Now back on Gorman, Syril meets with Caro's daughter Enza, as he tries to warn her that the Empire is up to no good. He thinks there's a way to convince the Empire that the Gorman rebels are not working alone. They're convinced to coordinate all these attacks by outside helpers, and they could lay all the blame on that outside help, but Enza slaps him in the face. And although Syril is trying to do the right thing and save these rebels, he is denied. We then cut to Yavin, where we get a very interesting conversation between Cassian and Bix, as Bix is asking Cassian what happened when the Force Healer touched him. She tells Cassian that he is so much more than a pilot. The Force Healer knew it. She sensed him from across the yard. Bix even says that she sensed this before, that she's had dreams like that. And the only reason that Cassian is upset with her right now is because she knows that she is telling the truth. We then get reintroduced to General Draven. The last time we saw this character was over 9 years ago in Rogue One. And much like we got to see Bail Organa last week, we are going to get to see more and more familiar faces in the back half of this Andor Season 2, because it leads directly to Rogue One, where all those rebels are together on Yavin 4. So expect more familiar faces like General Draven. However, Draven is very upset because he's catching Cassian as him and Wilmon are leaving the base. And this rebellion is growing stronger and stronger and bigger, and you can't just take a ship and leave. But in this episode 7, in 2 BBY, Cassian says, "Don't push too hard. The day I need permission to leave is when I'm gone." Now, some things do change. By the time of Rogue One, Cassian is fully committed to this rebellion. But right here, right now, he still has a ways to go, as he seems almost unconnected to the rebellion here on Yavin. But that will change. We then get this scene between Vel and Bix. We learn that over the last year since Cinta died, Vel became a smuggler for the rebellion. However, now she is going to take on the new recruits because she found herself doing too many dangerous missions because she didn't really feel as she had anything left to live for. Now, Bix asks if she's there for Cassian, but Vel says no. They sent me here to talk to you, Draven and Dodona. So Draven, we just talked about. But Dodona, that's a completely different story. Jan Dodona was first introduced in Star Wars A New Hope. And although we probably won't see him in Andor Season 2, it is still a very cool reference. But the reason that Draven and Dodona sent Vel here to talk to Bix is because they need Cassian. The rebellion needs him. The base on Yavin 4 needs him. And right now, he just seems disinterested. Vel even says, "I know you, Bix. I know how much this means to you. We're not Luthen's puppets anymore. They're not a bunch of maniacs running around on Aldhani." Because back in Season 1, where we first get introduced to Vel, is on Aldhani. And it's been over 3 years since then, and the rebellion has come quite a long way. They're building a real army here on Yavin. They need Cassian to be a leader now. And Bix reassures Vel that Cassian will be there when they need him. Back on Gorman, we see Wilmon and Cassian arrive, as Wilmon shows Cassian where Dedra is always staying and tells him to check the comms first thing in the morning to make sure they are working. And when Cassian goes to check into the hotel, the same kid from episode 5 is working the register. However, this time Cassian is not there as Tyrion Starr. He's there as Ronnie Guja. Both of them recognize each other, but they can't say anything about it because people are watching. But he does give him the room that faces the courtyard and tells him that he has to carry his own bags to his room. When Cassian gets to his room, we see him check his comms, as Wilmon's on the other end, and here we learn that there's a relationship between Wilmon and Drina, a pretty important piece of information for later down the line. But the episode ends with Cassian looking out the window in his room, ready for episode 8, where the craziness begins. And that ends episode 7. Now, I'll be completely honest with you, episode 7 is my least favorite of these 3. That does not mean it's bad by any means. Episode 8 and Episode 9 are just some of the greatest Star Wars we've ever seen. But this 7th episode is still very, very good, and when you combine it with the next 2 episodes, it's the perfect setup. Now, with the whole Force healer stuff, it really gives Cassian's story more meaning, at least in terms of the Force itself. He is the messenger, and as we see in Rogue One, that's literally what his final purpose is, to be the messenger for the Death Star plans. Now, I do give this episode an 8.8 out of 10. It is really good, especially in a setup for the next 2 episodes. This episode in particular plays very well off of the year gap by telling us a great story while alluding to the gap in between these episodes. So tell me what you think in the comment section below. Rate episode 7 out of 10. And I can guarantee you, while you're watching this breakdown, I am currently working on episode 8 and episode 9 breakdowns, and you don't want to miss those. But while you wait, did you watch Tales of the Underworld? Because I broke down the entire thing in this video right here.